For all your email management needs, look no further than Aweber, the preferred choice for geekoutdoors.com. Sign up today and you could get a 30-day free trial by checking out the affiliate link in the description area below. Hey, welcome to another episode of geekoutdoors.com. One of the many benefits of being a Linux user is the fact that it is secure, especially when you compare it against other operating systems like Windows. However, it seems like more and more we are hearing news about vulnerabilities that can affect Linux and even Unix-based operating systems, such as this recent Samba vulnerability that is actually a similar exploit that the WannaCry epidemic used as well, or a recent malware that could affect up to 36 million Android devices or maybe even more. And with news like this, it makes you think, is Linux not safe? Is it not secure to use anymore? So that's what I want to get into today. So I saw this really amazing video on Quidsup's channel, and if you have not seen Quidsup's channel, he is a Linux based channel. He is a securities expert and knows a lot about Linux, and this most recent video he did talks a lot about these most recent exploits and what it really means to people, specifically from a security point of view. Now, I will leave the link in the description area below if you wanted to see this. Now, this made me think about the security issues surrounding Linux, and really from a general user's point of view, because a lot of times if people have never used Linux before, when they read things like this, it's going to make them hesitant to use Linux, okay? And so that's not something that I think is good for the community as a whole. And also it'll keep people from, really experiencing all the many wonderful things that Linux has to offer, okay? So that's really why I'm making this video. And so the first thing we want to talk about is really what Linux is in general terms, okay? And so whenever you're talking about Linux, you really are talking about GNU Linux, because Linux is actually the kernel and GNU is the operating system on top of that. And so that is really technically the correct term. But since a lot of people just think of it as Linux, the whole entirety, that's what I'm going to refer to it as. And so the security of Linux really starts at the kernel level, and that's why I wanted to point that out. So when it comes to operating systems, there's primarily three different structures to build a kernel. And I am by no means a kernel expert, but this will give you a general idea of why it is secure, okay, and why a lot of people go back to that. And so when you think about Linux, it actually uses a monolithic kernel. And so Unix, it also uses a monolithic kernel. So what that means is all the control is done at the kernel level. Okay, and then another architecture is the microkernel, where not all of the control is at the kernel level, and then it's distributed to the user space and other service level controls. And so not all the control is there, so that means there is not a single point of failure. So that is the microkernel. And then there is another one, which is a hybrid kernel, which has a mixture of both. Okay, and so in general terms, a lot of times why a monolithic kernel is seen as more secure is because you're going to have to go through a lot of different user space and systems in order to get to the kernel, and the kernel controls everything. Okay, so if you want to control everything, you have to get to the kernel level. Whereas the other architectures, if you're able to get to the user space levels and you're able to get control of those different services, then potentially you could take control of the system. Okay, so there's been really a lot of debate over that over the years, but that's really in general why people say Linux is secure. And if you actually look at the way the kernels, the architecture is actually built, here's Linux and here's Windows. Okay, and Windows uses a hybrid structure, and then here we have Mac OS, which is Unix based, and it also uses a monolithic architecture as well. And then if you see here the Android operating system, it's very similar to Windows in terms of the architecture, where it's more of a hybrid approach. Okay, so that's why you know, a lot of times people would say Android is truly not Linux as you would think, and that's why there could be security issues, because it uses this hybrid structure. Okay, so that gives you a little background on how these are set up. So whenever we hear security issues such as this recent Samba one, they will refer to a vulnerability rating, okay, or a vulnerability issue, which is CVE, and that goes to a site called cvedetails.com. Now, this is where a lot of people come when they want to actually look at security threat levels and also monitor all the security issues in various different categories, okay? And if you look here, these are the total number of vulnerabilities, top 50 products, as you can see here. And at the top is the Linux kernel. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the kernel is a part of the operating system. Okay, so there are many different operating systems that use the Linux kernel, so that number is high for that reason. Now, when you are looking, here's Mac OS and there's all these other Windows one. The main thing you want to look at is not only the number of vulnerabilities, but also the vulnerability levels as well. And so if you actually look at the different vulnerability levels, and they go from 0 to 10, with 10 being the worst. So here is the details for the whole Linux kernel. And as you can see here, there's definitely different security threat levels, mostly in the 7 to 8 range. And there are some in the 9 to 10 range as well. And then if you go over to Mac OS, there's actually quite a bit in the 9 and 10 level, which is probably more surprising than you would think, you know, as a lot of times when we think about Mac OS, we think about it as a secure operating system, especially since it is Unix based. Okay, so now let's go ahead and move over to Windows, and there's a lot in 9 to 10 as well. But it is surprising that there were more 9 to 10 levels in Mac OS than there is in Microsoft Windows. However, as we all know, a lot of the vulnerabilities and threats are usually Windows based. Okay. Now, you also, let's go ahead and look at Android. And Android, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, you know, the Android architecture, it really doesn't use a monolithic architecture. And so there's quite a bit of vulnerabilities in the 9 and 10 range, which is definitely not good. Now, if you look at Apple's iPhone OS, way less when it comes to the 9 and 10 levels. But once again, there are definitely vulnerabilities here as well. So as you're looking at all of this, you know, it goes back to the whole thing, you know, is Linux still safe and is it still secure to use? I would say absolutely. It is still safe and still secure to use. But as you've seen with these news, and you know, like, you have to also take the news with a grain of salt, but you cannot ignore it as well. But with all these news that is coming out and with more sophisticated vulnerabilities being created, you know, we just can't simply ignore it. Okay, so in general, if you use Linux as a desktop operating system, you normally have less to worry about when it comes to security threats. You know, as a lot of these are more targeted towards servers, okay, and also in terms of the desktop operating systems, it's really more targeted towards Windows-based operating systems, okay. And so if you are a desktop operating system user of Linux, I would say for the majority of people, myself included, I don't worry about it as much, okay. So I still think that you not having an antivirus or any or malware solution on a Linux desktop operating system, that is just fine, you know, for the majority of users. However, you know, one of my subscribers or one of my viewers pointed out that even though the Linux desktop operating system is secure and you don't have to worry about as many threats, that doesn't mean that, you know, there can't be Windows-based vulnerabilities that could actually reside on your Linux-based desktop operating system. And so with that being said, you know, there are definitely ways that you can feel more secure or actually do more checks on your desktop by having an antivirus or malware or, you know, solution available for Linux. And the most popular one is ClamAV. Okay, and so ClamAV The version that's on the repositories, I don't think that's the most recent version, and so you could download it for free at clamav.net. And another one is Sophos, and Sophos is an antivirus malware solution that is also heavily used for Apple Mac OS and also for Unix-based operating systems as well. And they also have a solution for Linux. Now, you could also download this for free. However, you will have to give them your contact details, meaning your email address and your name, in order to get this. Okay, so the reason why I wanted to point this out is the fact that, you know, you can't completely be, I guess, like I said earlier, you know, dismiss all the issues relating to it. Okay, and so if you do have a Linux desktop and you are using it in an environment where you have shared networks, you have other operating systems that you're all using the same network, then it's really a good idea to have one of these solutions on there. Or even every now and then, I myself, you know, might even just download these antivirus or malware programs and then just go ahead and run a scan every now and then. Okay, so, you know, and before I wouldn't never even think about that, to do that on a regular basis. But with all these new, more advanced threats coming out, you know, you always have to keep that in mind, and that, you know, a lot of times it might not even be a Linux-based threat. It could be a Windows-based as well. And so that's really what I wanted to talk about today. It just really made me think after seeing all this, and then after seeing Quidsups video, it made me think more about the security and also the overall safety of using Linux, you know. And after doing some research and kind of really looking at these threats at a more detailed level, Linux is still secure, no doubt about it. However, the caveat is here, we do have to be a lot more knowledgeable on a regular basis, and then also, you know, kind of be, I guess, smarter about how we use our operating systems, and also know that there are definitely ways that you can add additional security on your desktop, you know. And, you know, there are many other ways that you could harden your Linux systems as well. However, these are general ways that you can feel more secure and safe if that's something that you want to do. So that's it for this particular episode. If you had any thoughts on Linux security as a whole, or how it compares to other operating systems, or maybe some of your own methods of keeping your Linux desktop operating system, or even if you have a server, keeping it more secure, leave it in the comments area below. And as always, if you did get value out of these videos, leave a like and subscribe. And if you wanted to support my channel further, you could do that at patreon.com/Geek Outdoors. Thanks for checking out this episode. And as always, if you like these videos, be sure to click on the subscribe button. And for full written content, audio content, and additional geek stuff, head over to geekoutdoors.com. And I'll see you outdoors on the very next episode.